Hi everybody. It's been a long time since I put out a video on this channel, so I figured I'd do something right now. What I've been thinking about is doing a kind of a weekly or bi-weekly or preferably weekly series called Mechanic Meditations, where I think about something or I talk about something that is on my mind or a question that I pose to some of my automotive students or a question that I've asked myself many, many times over the years when I've been at the dealer uh, or at the fleet that I work at now, or some sort of philosophical thing that I've come up with while working on a car. And I've figured, that's something that might be worth talking about, or at least getting out there into the ether and having other people think about. So I'm going to start off with the first question, and which is the most basic question, which is the most probably the most asked question. So that's, why did you want to become a mechanic? Why did you or why do you want to become a mechanic? I ask, why do you want to become a mechanic to my students when I have them at the class that I teach. And it's the question that many people ask mechanics, why did you want to become a mechanic? So for me, it was, well, you guys have seen, if you watched the other videos, the many long videos that I put out on this channel, you've seen the 1978 Chrysler Cordoba that I have. That was my daily driver for a long time. That was, shoot, how long did I drive that thing? I drove it in 2003, 2003 or I got it in 2003 or 2004. So starting from the beginning, my first car was a 1983 Oldsmobile Cutlass Sierra. It was a white Oldsmobile four-door sedan, front-wheel drive V6. I think it was the 3 liter, 3 or 3.2 liter V6. Might have been 3.5 liter V6 from General Motors. It was a nice car, actually. It had the Brougham velour interior. It was my parents' car. They bought it brand new in 1983 or 1984, somewhere around that time frame, and they got it really nice, fully loaded. It had a cassette deck. A cassette deck. People younger than the age of about 20 probably don't know what cassette decks are, but it had a cassette deck. It had an AM/FM radio. The cassette deck broke because when I was a young child, like 3 or 4 years old, I stuck raisins in it. So that's why the cassette deck didn't work anymore. When I got it, it had about 200,000 miles on it. I started driving when I was 17. I turned 18 in 2003, so 2000, late 2001, early 2002, I was 17 years old, and that was my first car. I learned how to drive in that thing. That was my car. I upgraded the radio to a CD player. It was 1.5 DIN. So DIN is maybe what, 1.5 inches tall. It's a standard kind of CD player head unit size. Mine was it 1.5? Might have been 2 DIN. Yeah, no, it was 2 DIN. So it was double the size. So I got a Pioneer. I remember this. I got a Pioneer. I don't remember the model, but I got a Pioneer CD player, and I didn't know how to take the dash apart, so I took it to a shop over in Anaheim. I'm in Southern California. I'm in Orange County, so I think I took it to a shop over in either Anaheim or Orange. I think it was Anaheim because it was very close to where I used to buy Magic the Gathering cards. There was a comic book shop. I think, whoa, what street was it on? It was on Catella. I think it was on Harbor, either Harbor or Brookhurst. I forget. I know that I took it over to some sketch kind of area in Anaheim or Orange, probably Anaheim, and it was an old house that had been converted into an audio shop, and I had them put the CD player in. After that, I drove it around, and this car had one engine put in it already. My parents didn't believe in buying cars, or they thought that they had a mental emotional block where they thought that they couldn't afford a new car, even though they could. So they repaired this car by putting a new engine in it at the local service shop. They never took it to a dealer. They took it to a local service shop. It was a Unical 76, and that's where I first kind of wanted to become a mechanic. Some of my earliest memories are when we picked up the car or we drove through the alleyway to get home because it was right around the corner. It was like half mile from where we lived. We would drive through the alleyway and I would look into the garage and I would see it was a dark garage, but I could see all the belts hanging from the wall. I could see the toolboxes. I could see the workbenches and all the parts scattered everywhere. And to a 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old boy, that looks really, really cool. And I always wanted to do that. I was always a kind of technical person. I grew up with Legos. I grew up with Duplo when I was a young kid, and then Lego and Lego Technic and K'NEX. I got the K'NEX roller coaster, the first edition, and then the K'NEX what was it? The big ball machine, and built all that stuff. I would get it for Christmas, and in 3 days, I would build this gigantic 5-foot tall structure. It was taller than me at the time. So anyway, I get this 1983 Oldsmobile, and it breaks down a lot. It's in the shop a lot, and just keep feeling this kind of helplessness. It was a mix of helplessness and anger and frustration that, one, it kept breaking down, and two, I had no power to fix it. There was nothing that I could do because I didn't know how to fix it. So I remember I still had the 83 Oldsmobile for my first year of college, 2003, and I drove it to college once, and I was taking auto classes, and it was running really rough, and I didn't know it, but it was misfiring. It was misfiring on like cylinder 2 or cylinder 6 or cylinder 5, something like that. And the auto shop teacher pulls out the ignition wire, the spark plug wire, and it just falls apart. And he makes a new one, puts it back on, puts the new one on, and I drive home that night because it was a night class. I drive home at like 10:20 at night, 10:30 at night, and it's running better than I've ever had it. So that's part of fed into why I want to become a mechanic, because this guy just pulled off one single wire, made a new one out of parts that he had at school, spare parts, and put it back in my car, no charge, and I'm driving home in a car that feels brand new. And I didn't understand why it did that. I had taken auto shop in high school. That's why I went on to take auto shop in college. But I didn't quite understand I didn't understand how the ignition system worked fully at the time. I knew the theory, the ignition coil, the magnetic fields collapsing, all that stuff. But I knew the theory, but I didn't know the practical application. I wanted to know the practical application. And after another few months, the water pump blew on it. It just started puking out green coolant. And at the time, I still didn't have money. I worked a really crap job. Was it office space? I was other no. I was at the record. I worked at a record store, a corporate record store, and I was getting paid $7.20 an hour. This was in 2003, 2003, 2004. So, federal minimum wage is still $7.50 or so. I was getting paid. Was I getting paid 7.20, 7.30? I was getting paid crap money, and I lived in Southern California. And even though it's way more affordable than it is now, I mean, Jesus Christ, man. Yeah, don't talk to me about housing prices. Even though it was way more affordable than it is now, $7.50 at 10 to, or I was working like 20 hours a week. $7.50 at 20 hours a week. That's still not a lot of money. That's let's just do the math here. $7.50 times 20. Oh yeah, that's $150 a week. I got paid weekly. That's great. Sometimes I would get 40 hours. Let's figure that out. Wow, $300 a week. Woo-hoo-hoo-hoo. Minus taxes divided by 1.3. So I was getting a whopping like $230 a week. I couldn't afford to fix that car. I couldn't afford. I could barely afford gas at the time. I remember I had to like work for my parents, work for my dad, get some spare money, save, just and go without stuff that I wanted. And I was not in want of food or clothing or anything like that. Now I realize I was a very lucky kid, but back then I thought I was poor. So anyway, couldn't afford to fix that car. My parents decided to get rid of it. So we get rid of it, and then I buy the 1978 Chrysler from my grandmother, and I paid $1,500 for it. I paid her on installments. I think it was $150 a month, somewhere around there. And I drove that thing for how many years? 2004. Let's just say 2004. I drove it across country to Taos, New Mexico, and we'll get to that. And 2008, I drove it for 4 years. I drove that in Chrysler for 4 years. 360 engine. It was getting on a good day about 13 miles a gallon, and it wasn't. Let's just be honest. It was a beater car. It was an absolute beater car, but I liked it. I liked it because it was actually easier to work on than the Oldsmobile. Oldsmobile was 83, Chrysler was 78. Chrysler had a lot of emissions material on it. It had thermostatic sensors. It had vacuum lines. It had a thermoquad carburetor that was designed for emissions, not for power. And the distributor, the ignition timing was really retarded, and it was designed to not burn fuel. It had to be smogged. Smog law in California is 1976 and later must be smogged. There was a rolling cutoff, but then Governor Schwarzenegger at the time got rid of the rolling cutoff. So now it's at 1975 and earlier is allowed to, is exempt from smog. 76 and later has to be smogged. I was 78, I had to get smogged. So I took it to the mechanic, a mechanic my dad knew, and we would tune it to pass smog, and then I'd take it back and he'd retune the carburetor and adjust the ignition timing, advance the timing, and make it peppier. But even from the factory, that thing was rated at only 190 horsepower. 360 cubic inches, 190 horsepower. It had a 4-barrel carburetor. It's thermoquad, so 2 really small primaries and 2 really big secondaries. Tuned for mileage and emissions. 190 horsepower, but it had 240 foot-pounds of torque, so it was a little bit torquey on it. It could get off the line if it was tuned correctly, but the thermoquad, okay, so the thermoquad, the main body of it starts to warp and starts to leak fuel. Okay, I had a ton of problems with that car. Fuel pump went out on it. I had to get it towed. Water pump went out on it. While I'm on that cross-country trip, I'm coming back from Taos, New Mexico. I'm on I-10 late at night in the middle of nowhere, New Mexico. I'm like 6 miles east of the town of Separ, Separ, New Mexico. Go look it up on a map. Breakdown. I start smelling coolant. And I look at my temp gauge. Well, I don't start smelling coolant. I smell a sweet smell. I don't know what it is at the time because I'm not experienced. I look down at my temp gauge and the thing is pegged. It's absolutely pegged. And I panic a little bit, pull off to the side of the road. Luckily, I had cell phone service. I call a tow truck. It's 2 hours. It's a 2-hour wait to get the tow truck. My only company at the time is a cow. In the darkness, I can't even see the cow, and I have a flashlight. I can't see the cow. The tow truck driver picks me up. Doesn't take me to Separ, New Mexico. He takes me to the next town over because it's bigger and it actually has a gas station or a repair station. That's Lordsburg, New Mexico. That's more on the western border. And I wait there. I get a room across the street from the repair station, and then the next day, I wait 5 hours for them to fix my car. And I watch them from across the street. And after they're done repairing the water pump, luckily the engine didn't blow. I watched them after they repair the water pump. The guy takes the radiator cap off the hot engine and coolant just goes everywhere. It hits the top of the hood or at the bottom of the hood, splashes out. Luckily it didn't hit him, so he's not burned, but like even with my limited experience just doing a few oil changes and minor repairs and taking like 2.5 years of auto classes, I know, hey bro, you kind of screwed up there. That's like what were you doing? And then I drive from Lordsburg into Tucson. When I hit Tucson, I hit traffic because it's Friday. Yeah, it's a Friday at rush hour. My temp gauge starts going up and I start smelling coolant again. Pull off the highway as soon as I can get breakthrough traffic in a park, and it's leaking coolant all over the place from the thermostat housing. I don't know where it's leaking from, but I know it's bad. I pay an extra $50 to have a mechanic come out the next day, Saturday, and look at it. All he had to do was tighten some bolts. So I'm paying for a room to stay at and an extra $50 Saturday call out for him to tighten some bolts that a mechanic in Lordsburg couldn't do. Anyway, okay, long story. I get back home. Car's fine. I have a thing. I like to be able to do things myself. I want to be able to do things myself. I don't want to rely on anybody. It's nice to have people do things for you if you ask them. It's nice to be able to know that people can do things for you. But for me, I have to know that I can do something myself. And this whole trip through the American Southwest it was so enjoyable. It was one of the best and experiences I've ever had in my life, and I wouldn't trade it. But it is kind of terrifying being out in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night with only a cow and passing traffic on the interstate as your company. And you have this feeling of helplessness. I did keep tools in the back of my truck, or back of my car, in the trunk. Look in the trunk. He must mean trunk. I did keep tools, but I didn't keep parts. I never thought that the water pump would go out. Never thought that I would have to retighten a thermostat housing that somebody else didn't tighten. And even like now that I think of it, why did they loosen the thermostat housing? You don't need to on that car when you're replacing a water pump. All you do is pop off one end of a hose. So now I question what that mechanic was doing. I do not like not being able to do things. Fix my own car, build my own stuff. This desk, I built this desk. I cut it, I stained it, I put the legs on, I built it. I've built all kinds of other stuff. I like being able to do things. I like not having to rely on other people. And that is really the core from me being a mechanic, because I always wanted to drive. I always wanted to have a car. I always wanted to be able to leave and go places by myself. And if I absolutely needed to, I wanted to be able to fix my car so that I could continue on. So that's why I want to become a mechanic. To be able to not have to rely on people. And I think that is a very admirable virtue, goal, attribute, personality trait, however you want to put it. I think that is an incredibly important and admirable thing to aspire to. So that's why I ask myself, and that's why I ask my students. So thank you for putting up with probably like 20 minutes of video. I hope this was kind of enlightening. I want to do these every week. I've got a number of questions here, and all of these questions and all of these topics that I have written down here, I do ask my students, or I try to, throughout the 16-week semester that I teach. And because I auto mechanics, you can learn auto mechanics online. Over my 13-year career, probably a quarter of it I've learned online. The rest has been from books, training, and screwing up. Personally screwing up. Because that's the best teacher. Failure is the best teacher. But I want my students to think about this stuff. And I want you to think about this stuff too. So put in the comments below like why you wanted to become a mechanic, or why do you want to become a mechanic. I'd love to hear why, or your reasonings, and get a discussion going. All right. Thanks a lot. Take it easy.